For the past few hours, world leaders have been arriving from the Nuclear Security Summit. And let's show you what's going on now live at Joint Base Andrews. That's just outside Washington, D.C. As you can see, a number of planes there on the tarmac. Within the hour, as we just told you, the plane carrying Chinese President Xi Jinping should be touching down here. He has a packed schedule in front of him, including a one-on-one meeting with U.S. President Barack Obama. CCTV's Nathan King has been at the White House all day. And Nathan, these two leaders have been meeting quite frequently, haven't they?
Yeah, it's difficult to spot a month where they don't either call each other or actually meet face to face. Remember, of course, there was the historic state visit here behind me in September ahead of the UN General Assembly's 70th anniversary. Of course, they also met on the sidelines of the Paris Climate Conference in November as well. Multiple phone calls. They'll meet here. Of course, there will be a one-on-one bilateral meeting, one of the few that the US president is going to hold with world leaders. They're also obviously going to set to meet next year when the G20 goes to China as well. In absolute regular contact, of course. Remember, we talk a lot here on CCTV about a new model of great power relations. Of course, there are differences as well. But nuclear security is one thing that the US and China are used to and building a relationship, not just when it comes to national proliferation like we've seen on the Korean Peninsula, but also safeguarding nuclear stocks from terrorists, which is what this summit is going to be all about.
And Nathan, aside from these two men, let's talk about the two countries. We talk a lot about China and the United States taking a leading role in issues like climate change, but nuclear security and development, this is another example where there is close cooperation.
Yeah, the U.S. Energy Secretary Monitz was actually in China last month, and the U.S. and China unveiled a center of excellence there, where basically best practices are going to be instructed to the Chinese civilian nuclear industry, and there'll be all sorts of training. These centers of excellence are opening up around the world. Now, remember, China is developing rapidly as a civilian nuclear power, nuclear exporter as well when it comes to power plants, many planned along the Silk Road initiative in Central Asia as well. The U.S. also a big civilian nuclear power. So there's a real meeting of minds here when it comes to keeping this sort of material out of terrorists' hands, creating a transparency when it comes to the global trade as well. That's just one aspect of it as well. Of course, proliferation is still very much high on the agenda. We've had the recent UN sanctions leveled against the DPRK, which the US and China essentially hammered out on their own before presenting it to the rest of the United Nations Security Council. And this will be a chance here as the two leaders meet to take stock and see if those sanctions are working. And also, not just the sticks, but also the carrots involved in bringing the DPRK back to the table. Remember, that's one of Beijing's big desires here, is to reopen the six-party talks. So there's lots on the agenda, not just when it comes to the Nuclear Security Summit, but also the bilateral issues that unite the two big world economies.
And it's interesting, Wang Yi and John Kerry, of course, worked very closely on these sanctions against the DPRK. China, a key figure with the negotiations with Iran as well. And another piece that just came out recently out of China, it has remodified a miniature neutron source reactor. It's now running at full capacity. This, again, a result of China-U.S. nuclear security cooperation. And this low-enriched uranium cannot be used for an atomic bomb. Again, lowering the dangers of it ending up in the hands of terrorists. Do you think that this is a kind of model that can be put forward at the summit as the discussions continue among all of these leaders about areas where people can work together?
You're absolutely right. We don't want to get too technical, but I'm glad you mentioned low-enriched uranium. Of course, the big worry is that terrorists get their hands on something called high-enriched uranium, HEU, or plutonium. That is deadly in very small amounts. In fact, Japan was producing some that was in the size of chocolate bars that could be slipped into the pocket of a terrorist. That is now being reprocessed, by the way. So these low-enriched uranium plants that deliver, of course, nuclear energy, but also satisfy security concerns are the way forward. For example, look at Iran and the deal. There was big worries there about highly enriched uranium and plutonium as well. Now, lower enriched uranium, the problem is that can also be used in a so-called radiological device, a dirty bomb, which is attached to high explosives like a regular bomb, but causes a lot of damage, not necessarily on the scale of a nuclear weapon, but something, of course, that can create a lot of damage and psychological fear. But still, coming together, working out best practices for a growing nuclear industry, which of course helps when it comes to climate change as well, because whatever nuclear industry detractors there are, it is generally better for the environment, unless of course you consider the spent fuel as well. This is very important going forward, and the economy is very much seeing eye to eye on a lot of this.
Nathan King live for us there at the White House will be joining us throughout this hour.